Quickly, to the Batcave! Batman! 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 What's up? We're back. Sorry for the delay. Was a little sick there. This will be our last map, the Eternal Battlegrounds, otherwise known as EBG. Let's move on to step 1, figuring out the type of immersion. So here we have my big picture, and this is what I thought. So here's what I thought of color. I thought initially they're going for more naturalism, just laying out the setting, so that'd be leaning more towards narrative. But then, we obviously have a split for this area as the mud for one particular team. I was thinking, oh, maybe they're going to split it up between the colors, like this would be the forest area like we saw in Edge of the Mist, and down here would be like a snow area. But no, instead these two teams are pretty much some messy sort of green, but the one down here in bottom left is more like a swamplands. So, okay, that's out the window. It's not about gameplay. It's more about narrative. But then we have SMC, which is clearly indicated by more or less a beige donut and a chocolate filling in the center. And that obviously indicates a gameplay mechanic, which is this objective here in the center. So maybe it's leaning towards mechanics now. So maybe it is just a bell curve in the center. Well, then I got confused here because then there's this really, really dark part for the cave or the dredge. And that's not really a significant objective when compared to SMC having a dark spot in the center. And then you have this dark area over here, which again isn't really as significant as SMC. Doesn't make much sense. Which is why I said the color was very meh. Works for the map 50% of the time, I would say. So let's move on to the next element. So what's the element of shape trying to show off in this particular map? For the bigger shape, it's an equilateral triangle. Obviously there's some wiggle room. Some of the objectives lie a little bit outside that. For the most part, everything is within this bigger triangle. For smaller shapes, they were showing off objectives like towers, were fairly rectangular or square. Occasionally you get an oddball one just for variation's sake. For the keeps, the inside was boxy, and the outside had its own unique little shape to show off each little keep for each team. Then obviously in the center here, you have Stone Mist Castle, which is more or less a truncated triangle. This clearly differentiates it from every other objective on the map. So this is why I said the shape curve was leaning more towards gameplay. So let's move on to the last element. And here's looking at our lines. There are some long swooping lines that go from objective to objective, but mainly around the keeps you actually get smaller lines with a little more wiggle room and nuance. It's like this maze around Blue Keep, for example. But from objective to objective, we get big, strong, confident lines all the way to SMC. So, which is why I'm saying it leans more towards gameplay, because the smaller lines are usually within Stone Mist Castle itself, or within the keep, giving some contrast between those types of objectives. Alright, so back at the big picture, I'm giving this basically a 75%. It's doing the map justice 75% of the time. Obviously our Debbie Downer here is the color. While I had it more towards narrative side of things with that little bump for team colors, what I mean by this, it's basically a very weak narrative because we just have, oh, here's some swamplands, and the rest is hilly grasslands. Not exactly a strong narrative. There is a little color difference in the center. As far as the line and shape goes, shapes differentiate our objectives, as I mentioned earlier. Towers are a bunch of boxes, and the keeps have their own unique little shapes. And the lines, of course, are directing objective to objective, which is why I said the line is more towards gameplay. And you'll have shorter lines around the keeps for just variation's sake. So, moving on from that, let's go on to step 2. Map mechanics, to start. See our sentry here. Then Doliacs that deliver supply to objectives. Supply camps that spawn those Doliacs. A tower. A keep. Objective-specific upgrades, active guild upgrades, and passive guild upgrades. Special to this map, flipping these mercenary camps will send out NPCs that capture nearby supply camps. And of course, most special about this map is Stone Mist Castle itself. So like in our previous video for the Alpine Borderlands, I think this is a good time to talk about relationships. And this is where I probably take issue, because as you can see, for Green Keep specifically, there's too many relationships. All 4 towers have some form of relationship to this particular keep. What this means, they can pretty much sit in their keep and treb and easily defend each tower. Whereas in Blue Keep, they can't. They can only do that for 2 of their towers from the keep itself. And it gets a little weird with Red Keep here. It's easy for them to defend Veloka and Overwatch because they're so close with trebs, or to retake them if they're flipped. However, for the left side of the keep, you can see up here Mendens, they actually can't treb any walls down, but they can be tread from there in case an enemy takes it. And of course, I've already mentioned in the previous video, supply camps that obviously you can't really siege from, their relationship would be the Doliacs, going from objective to objective. And lastly, SMC itself, I'm actually okay with this particular objective having multiple relationships because it's the obvious focal center of the map. There's one new idea I want to talk about, and it's called time, or in this case, timing. And what I mean by this is each particular objective takes a certain amount of time to either capture or defend. So, for example, let's just say our camps take a value of 1, our towers at a value of 5, our keeps are at a value of 15, SMC or Stonemas Castle is a value of 25. So just normally from the original inception, if a player was to go along this route, they would add up time from objective to objective. So 1 plus 5 plus 15 plus 25. If we assume that playtime is about 2 hours, I would think that's fairly natural. That means the flow of the map can be fairly back and forth even if you win or lose. However, what happened from a feature creep update is guild upgrades. What this did is made defending a lot easier, so these times up here get multiplied by 2, but the average playtime did not necessarily increase. It's still only 2 hours. So SMC will now take, say, 50 minutes instead of 25. That's more than half of our little assumed playtime over here. And that's where I have a big issue because you're not really respecting players' time anymore. You're just throwing in this feature, hoping to create some excitement, some hype, some purpose. But what you end up doing is wasting more of the player's time and stagnating the map, which is what I'll get into here shortly. Guild upgrades. They made defending SMC a lot easier, and same with other objectives with guild upgrades. It takes more time to go to objective. So what happens is we pretty much see the action being in the front towers and SMC itself, and occasionally the supply camps. In the rare case, there is Mendens because it's mostly undefended from the keep. As far as the flow of the map goes, that's pretty stagnant. So how do we fix this? You probably can't, unless you really want to get rid of guild upgrades, and that would probably cause mass outrage. Nor is really moving objectives around that viable, because then you enter the territory of, well, you may as well just make a new map. And clearly that's not much of an option at this point. Is this really all apparent to a player? Let's check this out in the Sightlines. Alright, so we're at step 3 here, the Sightlines. I suspect this is going to be a lot shorter because there's a lot of visibility here, I can say off the bat. So let's start at some spawn points. And here on the green side, we obviously have a pretty clear view straight ahead with the path. I can see the beacon in distance. There's a portal on my left, not too worried about that. So it's super duper clear where to go from here. Going towards the right side this time. There's a little drop-off point here. You can say this way isn't too far off from the middle spawn, so you can make a case for spawn camping. This direction is a little bit better, but still, if you have a proper blob, I think you can definitely spawn camp this side as well. And another little waterfall drop-off point. Yeah, this side doesn't deviate too much from middle. I think you can make a case for spawn camping here. Way over here, I think you should be safe. So this would be the alternative route you could take and avoid any kind of spawn camping. And to the blue side. Starting out, everything's pretty visible. I see the keep. There's some little huts. So from here, it's very easy to see some priorities when it comes to objectives. Now let's try another side. Looks like there's a little jumping puzzle right here, although that's not too far away from the middle path. I'd say going out this entire right side, you can definitely avoid spawn camping of any kind. There's enough elevation difference and there's plenty of distance. Let's head on over to the left side. Yeah, this spot right here is not very far away from the middle. All the way to the left, this is pretty good. I don't think you can really spawn camp the blue side as easily. And to the red side. Here we have a pretty clear view of everything. Like the others, it's clear I can go straight ahead. And I see other objectives on the map as well. Let's take another path. It seems on this left side you don't actually go very far. So it would be pretty feasible for maybe one whole map blob to cover these two exits. Going down the last path here, towards Minden's. There's a little jump off for the waterfall there. And here we see Minden's. I would say this is pretty safe distance away from the middle path. Harder to spawn camp. Another exit towards Minden's. One criticism, we should be able to probably see an objective like the spawn camp. Otherwise, this is a pretty far distance from the middle path. I would say it's pretty evident that for red and green keep, you can see the objectives very clearly. Lots of visibility, as we noted earlier, that this also means it's much easier to defend objectives that are closer. So, being very uninteresting for these particular keeps, let's just actually move on to blue keep. Now the sightlines for blue keep, of course, confirm our suspicions where the relationship for the closest two towers towards the spawn. Highly visible, much easier to defend, and possibly attack from. Whereas the two outer towers, they're way far away and you can't really siege from them per se. This is ideal because again, this keep doesn't have as many relationships as the other two. So this basically means the other objectives, since they're further away from this keep, you'll be doing the path of tower to spawn camp, or spawn camp to a tower. In this particular example, the blue side basically encourages more fights to happen, because it's a lot harder for them to turtle out each and every tower that's near their keep. They can only really do that for the last two towers. This allows that more conflict can happen, and there's a progression of objectives. The last important thing on this side I want to talk about is another victim to the feature creep, but this time it's gliding that hit. So I'm looking out over this hill where normally you could siege from this particular tower, but there's also this little rune next to it. You used to have a little jumping puzzle that led up to the top, and you can put trebs up there to start sieging Stone Mist Castle or the tower we just saw. But because of gliding, they ended up removing that, because clearly they didn't want players to glide into the tower. Now, however you feel about gliding, to me, this is just another example how adding on features later ruined the original design of a map. So I know people don't like jumping puzzles, but that was actually a good use of jumping puzzle when it came to World vs. World itself as a theme. That was actually a strategic location they can start sieging from. And now that it's gone, this map became even less interesting. Moving on from that little gripe, let's check out SMC. As we laid out earlier, you can clearly see most of the towers from here. Specifically the top floor, you can start trebbing fairly safely from there and start hitting the walls of every tower, except for maybe Overwatch. From there you'd have to probably siege from the outside, which is a little bit more dangerous. Cool. I think that covers all the sightlines, so let's go ahead and move on to the conclusion. Ignoring my bad gameplay, my conclusion is, well, you're watching it. I'm spending most of my time between our keep and Stone Mist Castle, pretty much going nowhere, doing nothing. Now, I did in part blame guild upgrades for making SMC easier to defend, taking longer to take out, and things like that. But there are other factors, like maybe a commander tag, maybe population issues or coverage. But one thing that an equilateral triangle map design needs is all 3 teams active. When it's just 2 teams, the potential for snowballing occurs, and thus we have this. And that disparity in size basically means even if we did capture supply camp and start an assault on the tower, the largest team that has Stone Mist can easily defend that tower. So even though attacking other structures is supposed to be the way to go, really, these maps require all 3 teams to be active. Or you engage in very boring gameplay of just flipping camps and empty towers, and constantly running away. Does that happen to you at all, ever? Let me know in the comments below. If you liked this video, hit that like button. If you hated this video, hit that dislike button, it's there for you. If you want to hear more, I'll be doing a total wrap-up of all the maps. Hit that subscribe, and you'll be notified. Otherwise, I will see you next time.